If you've traveled with us through the story of God, we have now covered over 3,000 years of history together, and we're now only about 800 years away from the birth of Jesus. So we're there, and we're at a point now in history in which God's people are divided into two kingdoms, a northern and a southern. There were 12 tribes originally. They were all one nation, and now they are divided. God had said this would happen with God's people earlier on. After Solomon was no longer king, it divided. So you have a northern part that's commonly called Israel, a southern kingdom that's commonly called Judah. And in a not surprising to us as we read back, but a very surprising move for them during the time, the people were going to be overcome and overwhelmed by an enemy nation in the north, and the northern kingdom was going to be conquered. A group called Assyria was going to come in, overtake them, conquer them, carry many of them off, and destroy most of what they had worked so hard to build up until that point. And it was startling and shocking because God's people assumed God was always going to protect them, always going to protect them from the enemy. He was always going to preserve this place called the Promised Land that he had hundreds of years earlier given them as they came in and had to fight along the way to get it. But once it was finally theirs, there was a time of peace, and they thought that would be it. But because they were unfaithful to God, they did not live the holy lives God had called them to. God was not just allowing, but he was actually at work with an enemy pagan nation, the nation of Assyria, and causing them to come in and overtake them in an act of discipline. So northern kingdom is about to be and in the middle of being overtaken, and God is calling up someone else to speak to the southern kingdom to say, I hope you're learning your lesson. And they were not. But God called up a man named Isaiah to be a prophet to speak to the southern kingdom to say, beware, this is going to happen to you. You need to understand and learn the lesson. Well, as God was calling up this man named Isaiah, I want us to at least grasp the fact that Isaiah was a very big deal. And he is probably the most well-known of all the prophets of the Old Testament. And when we get to the New Testament, and we will get there eventually, when we get to the New Testament, we're going to find that Isaiah is the most quoted prophet of them all. And when Jesus was revealing little by little who he was, he actually at a point read from Isaiah, laid it down and said, by the way, that just got fulfilled in me. And he sat down. It's a really cool moment. We'll get to that in months. But Jesus was able to quote Isaiah at that point to be able to say, this is truth that's happening now. And in 1947, something called the Dead Sea Scrolls were revealed and they were discovered, and they'd been there for a long, long time. And there was a little community there that dates back to 200 BC up until the time of Jesus. And they had all of these scrolls, all these scriptures that we call the Old Testament. Every single one of them was there in the Dead Sea Scroll compilation, with the exception of Esther. All the other books were there. And one of the cool things is that there was a scroll that had all 66 chapters of Isaiah. Every one that's in your Bible, all of it was found together there in the cave. And you rolled it out, it was 21 feet long, like the entire thing written out in Hebrew there as that was discovered. So Isaiah is a huge, huge deal. But I don't want us just to spend time talking about his message, even though it's powerful. I want us to actually look at Isaiah the man. Because when God called him up to be a prophet, he did not feel worthy of the calling that God had placed on him, which we grasp. I mean, Isaiah looked around and said, I am not qualified for this role. I am with a group of people that are about to be in trouble because we're not living the lives we should, and I am one of them. It doesn't necessarily mean that Isaiah was the worst of them, but he was definitely one of them. He did not feel qualified, and we grasp this. We know qualifications are required for just about every job. And before someone is going to coach you, you want to know, are you qualified to be my coach? Where did you play? What did you play? How do you know? Before someone teaches us, we want to know, are you qualified to teach me? Before someone leads us, have you ever been there before? Qualifications are important, and qualifications give us confidence. We know if we're qualified or if we're not. I mean, if things went south in Knoxville eventually, and they called and said, Chad, would you like to be the head coach of the University of Tennessee Vols? Well, yeah, I would really like that job. But I will not do well at that job. And I want the money. I would like the opportunity. But truthfully, I didn't play past high school, and I do not think I'm ready for that. Qualifications give us confidence. When we're not qualified, we're not very confident. About 20 years ago, I had my one and only surgery I've ever had. I had my right shoulder reconstructed. And so we're there in the hospital on the day of the procedure. My wife and I are in a room, and a medical professional walked in and said, here's the deal. Do you want to be put completely out or partially? I said, is there more than fully out? Like, that's what I want to be. They said, well, here's the shot. I said, I will take that shot. And they gave me the shot, and things began to get a little weird. And if you've had your wisdom teeth out or something like that, maybe you've gone through that. I've seen all the videos of the teenagers that get their wisdom teeth out. Their parents are filming. And so it was a little bit like that, maybe. But they gave me the shot, and the medical professional, and I am stressing that because obviously you're not there in the hospital doing what you do if you are not, looked at me with my wife sitting across from me. I'm in the hospital bed, and she's sitting there in a chair. She said, are there any questions, sir? And I don't remember everything about the moment, but I do remember saying it. If you've ever said something and then thought, why are you saying that? That was, she said, do you have any questions? And I said, what's your degree? That was, and I remember looking over at my wife, and she looked at me like, really? Like, is that really what we want to say right now? Like, we just had this, like, my wife became my mom, like, and that just looking at me like, And I remember it coming out going, yeah, it was odd to say, but I really don't have control over what is happening here. And but for me, even in a very altered state, in a very hazy moment, I thought, I need to check these qualifications, which would have been a better prenatal question, but it was too late then. But I wanted to know those qualifications were important to me. Isaiah has a moment we're going to see here in just a moment here where he enters into God's presence and immediately is overwhelmed with a feeling of, I'm inadequate and I'm unqualified for this. Therefore, in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 5, his immediate response to seeing God in his presence, and seeing God in his element, to experiencing all that he had, was, woe to me, I am ruined. I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. His immediate response was not, wow, cool, this is so amazing. It is, I am going to die. Like, I do not deserve to be here. Woe is me. The word is really, I am lost. I am broken. It's translated in most versions, I am ruined. Like, I should not be here. And I don't know that I'm going to survive this moment because what I am seeing is so far beyond what I am qualified to see. And as an Old Testament Hebrew man, if you will, an ancient Israelite, understanding what the presence of God was all about, he said, I'm going to die. It may be a vision, but I am not going to survive this vision in this moment. Now, in the New Testament, and we will get there in a few months, in the New Testament, when people met Jesus, those who believed he was God's son or going to be the Messiah, or even hoped that he was going to be the Messiah, when they saw him, it broke them. Now, we can look at other moments along the way after the initial visit and see relationships forming, even friendships forming. But initially, when they met Jesus, they would drop to their knees, or they would kiss his feet, or they would hold on and look away as they grabbed his cloak. They were afraid to be in his presence because they knew what that meant. But then as Jesus would pick them up, as he would hug them, as he would wipe their tears, and they realized they were invited and welcomed, things definitely changed. But there was still an understanding of this is different. But now that I know I'm invited and welcomed, I can at least relate to you, and I can hear you, and I think I can even speak to you. But oftentimes we look at that Old Testament, those experiences, and it allows us to get so comfortable that we lose sight of moments like Isaiah had when he was in the presence of God and so overwhelmed he dropped to his knees and said, I'm going to die. That was the last thing I'm ever going to see. When I was growing up in our house, we obviously had several different rooms, but in each of the rooms, there was a different feeling and a different experience and a different expectation. Being older than most of you, perhaps I grew up, and especially in the early 80s, there was a room in most houses that was called the dining room that was really an unused room. You might have as well just left all of the plastic on most of the furniture there. Because in the dining room, usually there was really thick carpet and it was a powdery blue, a weird color, and it just said, don't walk on me. Like anytime you looked at it, like Don't go past that. And then there was a couch that looked like it had not been sat on in a long time, and you were afraid to, because in my couch, if you sat on it, it would change the grain look of the couch, and it was just, we want to protect that. Then there was a dining room table that always had a white frilly thing over the top. It was this big, long table. We had a family of 4. We were a small family. There must have been 12 chairs around our dining table. We never ate there. There was really fancy dinnerware there. You had china that my mom had gotten at her wedding that was really never used. So when you went into the dining room, there was an immediate feeling of uncomfortability. Like you sat in some chairs that were very high up and almost leaning forward. You just kind of sat like this, and there was nothing in the room was cozy. And when someone came over and Mom was setting the place at the dining room table, it was like, oh, we're in the khakis today, so you go back into your room, because this is going to be important. Whatever is happening here is big. And even as a 5, 6, 7-year-old, I was like, I hate that room. It just feels different. I'm not comfortable. I have to be so still and quiet, and it's just a very strange place. Just on the other side of the wall was the living room. That was a little easier because there it was a little more comfortable. Nothing in there was white or light blue because it was going to get stained. It was going to get messed up at some point. You could even prop your feet up, even if people were over, as long as you kept your shoes on, and the television would be on at most of the time, unless it was a distraction, and we could turn it off and all engage in what's going on. So it wasn't really a kid's space, but it was a lot more comfortable than the dining room. And I'll come back to this in a moment, but for Isaiah, his experience in the presence of God was the dining room. He sat there and said, holy, 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 I do not need to be in this place. And he bowed and looked down and said, this is too much. And we go back to verse 1 of that same chapter, Isaiah 6. We get the full view of this vision. It says, in the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorpost and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried. I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. I mean, it was something he had never seen or experienced before. And you've got these wild visions. You've got the train of his robe being that big. He's in the temple. He's in the Holy of Holies. He's in the presence of God. You've got these seraphim, these otherworldly creatures with all of these wings, and you've got the voices and the choir. There's so much going on. He said, I'm going to die. This is beyond me. Overwhelmed at God's presence. And he knew he was doomed, or at least he felt he was doomed, because he understood what was happening, that the time of judgment was coming for God's people. And because his people, and he being one of the people, because they had been guilty of being religious and not righteous, of honoring God with their voices but not their choices, he knew that as a result, they were going to pay a price and they were going to experience something that they did not want to experience. He said, I cannot make it through this moment. Now, we read through the first chapter of the book of Isaiah. We won't do this now, but if you've read through that before, do read that this week in your reading. You'll see God even telling the people, you're singing your songs, and I'm not paying attention. You're praying your prayers, I'm looking away. You reach out your hand, you're going to get the back of my head. I am done with you. Because all these festivals and religious things that you're doing, they mean nothing to me if your hearts are not right. I don't want this. And it's out of that Isaiah finds himself being called up for this moment, and he knew he was not worthy of being in God's presence. Even thought he might die. So God addressed the situation, knowing how he felt. And in verse 6 and 7, don't do any 6, 7s, please. But in verse 6 and 7, then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it, he touched my mouth and said, see, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for. God knew what Isaiah was experiencing and feeling, of course. I think it was obvious with his posture, even if God couldn't read his mind and knew his feelings. So one of the seraphim takes out a live, hot, burning coal and touches his lips. And even in a vision, I don't know that it was a peaceful burning coal on your lips moment. But he has this moment, he has this experience, and what we find is the result is a change in how he was able to relate to, connect with God in that moment. That burning coal was the forgiveness that he needed. It was that pardon that he needed. And in that moment, Isaiah's experience with God went from dining room to living room right away. And it was, I'm not worthy, I'm face down, I can't even look at you right now, to, I think I just heard your voice. And I think I'm coming close now. And I'm hearing what you're saying. And there was an immediate change in the experience that they were having. And in many ways, it was as if God just pushed over the wall separating the dining room and the living room and said, now, come close. Now that we've dealt with the issue, now that we've dealt with the part of you that you believe is unqualified, I have something to say and I want you to hear it. And in verse 8, the beginning of verse 8, Isaiah said, then, after that moment, then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? And just as a little side thing, you people who want to look later, it's God at his throne. He's saying us. He's not talking about seraphim and me. He's talking about the Father, Son, and Spirit. He says, who is going to go for us? I've got something to say. I have something to reveal. I have a plan to put in place, and I need someone who is going to step into that. And I want us to pause here before we see the answer, because I think this is the place where eventually all of us will find ourselves. In a moment in which someone is going to need to speak up on behalf of God's truth. Someone is going to have to speak up in that moment and help someone see what's really going on. Someone is going to have to speak up and encourage. Someone is going to have to stand up and shine. Someone's going to have to take someone by the hand and say, everyone has left you, but I'm still here. Let's work through this together. Someone is going to have to stand up and say, that may be what everyone else is feeling and thinking, but this is what truth is. Someone has to step into that moment. And most of someone's, meaning most of us, in that moment, step back and say, I can't be me. I'm unqualified. I'm a man of unclean lips, and my people are like that. Or if you're a woman, I'm a woman with unclean lips. I can't do this. My hands are unclean. My life is unclean. I am not qualified to step into that moment. And the question all of us will have to wrestle with in that moment is, am I too hurt to help or even heal someone else? That's the whole question. Because we all know at some point we're broken people. If you're here saying you are sinless and perfect right now, truth is going to hit you hard eventually. But for the rest of us, we know we are broken people. We are fractured people. And the thought that God could use fractured people to heal broken lives makes no sense. Because God uses qualified people to lead people to places that they've already been. He uses coaches, qualified coaches, to coach people to do stuff they've already done. He uses qualified teachers to teach people things they already know. God doesn't take, surely, fractured people who are still in the process of healing and figuring things out and use them to be the helpers and possibly healers in other people's lives, would he? Well, God is letting Isaiah know, absolutely. In fact, most of the time, I'm going to use fractured people to heal broken lives. That's how he works. I think it's really easy for us when we look at the story that God has given us to forget all of the pain and regret that the world changers carried with them along the way. We look at Moses. There's a kid named Moses on a local high school team I'm friends with, and there was something happened Friday night, and I was able to look at him. I wanted to check his understanding of, truth. And I was like, Moses, man, part that C on that block, brother. And I thought, I'll see what happens. He was like, I got you, So, okay, he got it. We look at Moses like, oh, he's the big leader, parting the sea. He has all the power, the miracles. I don't know that Moses ever really enjoyed his story the way we enjoy his story. He spent decades when it got quiet at night, lying on the bed, knowing, I killed a dude. Like I murdered someone. And I got to live with this. And now I can't undo it. Live with that. We look at his story and go, man, he overcame. Somehow he was able to put it behind him and say, I murdered that guy, but I'm good with God. You don't put that away forever. That's with you. We stretch across thousands of years, we find Paul. And we look at Paul and go, man, he wrote all these bold things and all these letters that he wrote, and it seemed like he had it all together. And we forget that he ordered the execution of dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of Christians. Watch them die at his order. And we think he has this encounter with Jesus, and he goes, oh yeah, there was a weird season of life, and I killed a bunch of, that is with you. And I firmly believe if you'll right now just go through a mental list of the 1, 2, 3, or 4 people that made the greatest impacts in your lives, I bet every single one of them carried a pain or a regret that you don't know nothing about. You say, well, how were they able to work through it? Understanding that God uses fractured people to heal broken lives. He always has. You can say, well, of course, because there are no perfect people. True. But I mean deeply hurt, deeply wounded, people who have gone through it, people who had other people say when they were going through it, they'll never recover from that. You don't come back from that kind of mistake. You don't come back from that kind of embarrassment. You don't come back from that kind of broken relationship. You don't come back from that kind of arrest. You don't come back from on and on and on. And yet God uses so many of them to change the world, change our lives. They work through that, understanding that, yes, I'm not qualified, but once I experience that moment in his presence where he does that work, it puts me in a position where I'm not saying I've got it all figured out, but what I'm saying is, God, if you'll use someone like me, then chapter 6, verse 8, here I am. Send me. Here I am. And that was his response. God said, who is going to go for us? And we had other people like Moses in the past that said, I can't talk, I can't speak very well, I've got all this stuff. And Isaiah just has this moment of, all right, let me go. I'm stepping up. Not because all of a sudden he gained confidence in his own ability or his own purity. He was still this broken man, this unclean man with unclean lips, but he stepped up and said, I'll do that. You can send me. I'm a fractured, maybe even still broken guy, but I'm ready to move forward. Sometimes I'll go back through my notes in my phone and I write down prayers and stuff along the way. And I can go back many years to remembering a moment where I felt this way. And I remember typing into my little phone, am I too broken to ever be a healer? And I've wanted to delete that so many times, but I don't want to, because I feel like eventually a friend or maybe one of my children is going to say, Dad, I don't, and I'll be able to go, yeah, I've been there. I know that feeling, but God uses fractured people to heal broken lives. If you wait until the moment where you feel like you've arrived and you've got your degree in perfect life, as if that exists, if you wait until that moment happens, you are never going to step in to experience that call to life change that God's invited all of you to. It's not about being a prophet or a preacher. It is about God giving you moments to step up and say, okay, lead. I can't. My wife's a stronger Christian than me. I'm telling you to lead. You speak up. All the girls on my team, I'm telling you to step up. Lead, shine, speak. When God gives us those moments, we can either step back and say, I'm not qualified, or God, because of experience, I have experienced your freedom and your forgiveness through your own gift that you've given me, that I will step into this. Here am I, send me. You say, well, how does that work? Well, the thing that we need to notice about Isaiah before we move along from him is his response in God's presence. There are really two things that stick out to me, and maybe it'll be helpful or memorable to you. One, Isaiah was humbled by God's holiness. When he stepped into God's presence, he was immediately aware of his unworthiness. He was immediately aware of his unqualified nature. He was humbled that he was in God's presence. And for me, this is a challenge to remember when I'm gathering with you each week. Because I can come in and know that this is the time I get to reconnect with friends, see my spiritual church family, Hope my friends that I've invited are going to be here. Maybe somebody new is here. Then I'm thinking about, are the buckets under the seats? Is that working out? Do we have the announcement thing ready? Do we have this going on? Do we have the volunteer right? And all this stuff going on. And sometimes I have to remind myself that what I'm doing is I'm stepping into the presence of God in a way that I don't do when I'm in my car or on my mower. I'm stepping into the presence of God with our people, my church family. And if there is a part of me that is not a little bit broken and undone when I step into his presence, that I don't know that I am in his presence. And I don't know that I'm not even setting myself up for something shocking and startling when I leave this place. We want things to be comfortable. I prefer living room over dining room. I prefer being able to kick back a little bit. We put coffee in your hands and we try to keep the temperature, some of you hot, anyway, we try to make it the best we can for everyone. We want to make sure things are smooth. When things fall apart, something doesn't work, power goes out, like it drives me nuts, all the stuff. But at some point, when we're together, if there is no awareness of the holiness of God in such a way that puts us down a notch for a moment, that I don't know, I'm not going to say we're doing it right. I'm not sure that we're truly aware of what's going on. And when Isaiah approached God, even after his moment, he was still very aware of what was going on around him and that this was beyond him. He was humbled by God's holiness, and the other thing is that he was sick over his own sin. Those two things, I believe, put Isaiah in a position to be able to say, here I am, you can send me. Humbled by God's holiness, and also very, very much aware of and even sick over his own sin. His own disobedience disgusted him. And it is very tempting, the more we make gathering with God comfortable, it is very tempting to feel like we just get to come in and go, God, I did it again. I know I said last Sunday I never would, but I did it Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, third. I did it several. Anyway, I'm so sorry. I receive your forgiveness. Are we good? Can I go? And that is oftentimes our attitude, whether those are the words or not. But at some point, if we truly understand how our rebellion disrupts in our relationship and breaks the heart of God, until we're there, we're just going to keep the same cycle going. Every Sunday, you're asking God to forgive you for the same stuff, the same struggles, the same this or that. It doesn't have to be a gross sin, but it might be. It could just be anxiety or depression or not trusting in him or whatever's going on. And not the sense that that is your fault, but just saying, God, I want to trust you more. I know I was leaning on my own strength, my own this or that. We have a tendency to downplay what's going on. And Isaiah, when he truly found himself in God's presence, immediately said, I am undone. I do not deserve to be in this place. Now, you say, well, what changed then? If that's the case, then why are we even singing happy songs? And why are we trying to smile? And why do we stop after song 2 and meet and greet a neighbor? Like, what? Well, we need to just be on our faces and be sad. No, not the case. Just aware of God's holiness, disgusted by our own sickness, and saying, God, I know I don't deserve here, but I'm here because you invited me and you've welcomed me in, and I know this truth to be true. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, that man named Paul that I referenced a moment ago wrote, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. That is why we come into this place and do anything other than just fall on our faces and slide to the front and just lay down and say, God, I am a sick, dead worm, and I don't deserve to be in this place. It's because of this. Because when Jesus hung on the cross for us, all the gross stuff that ought to overwhelm us, all the stuff that ought to make us sick at our stomach, he took it all on. He said, they can't handle it. I'll take it for them. And as a result, he became sin in that moment, so that when we receive his grace, we might immediately become righteousness. Doesn't make sense. It's not fair, but it is exactly what God has said has happened along the way. And as a result, we're able to move from the dining room into the living room and connect with God in a way that is not uncomfortable or scary or frightening, but in a way that says, I'm aware you're here and you are the guest in this place and I'm listening. When you and I walk in full of pride in his presence, That's not dining room. That's not living room. That's bonus room junk. And now most of you have a bonus room. That's the room your contractor said, I don't really know what to do here. It's too big for a closet. We can just create a thing. Value will go up if you have another room. And then you thought, you know what? That couch that the cat claws and sits on, that'd be a great place for that. Those 2 dumbbells I never lift will go in the corner there. That broken Stairmaster can go right there. The television with the crack, we'll put it right there. Like, that's the bonus room. And let's take a couple of socks that don't match and just put them in the couch cushions, and it'll be perfect. That's the bonus room. And most of us have a tendency when we approach God to say, come on out to my bonus room, check it out. Don't mind me. Go ahead and start your holy stuff. I got to do a few things before we get started. That kind of pride in the presence of God is going to crush it every time. It's over. There's nothing there. There's nothing there for us. It's a hollow place. We go back to Isaiah chapter 1, and that's why God says, I don't want to hear your songs. Don't sing to me. I'm not listening to your prayers. You're wasting time. I don't come to church anymore. I don't want to be a part of that because it's not reflective of your hearts. I don't want that. You say, well, who can stand before God if he wants all of this holiness and all that? Hold on. Isaiah chapter 53, in Isaiah's own words, he says, but he, being Jesus, was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities, and the punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds, you say it. That's why. That's why we're able to be in this holy of holies and in God's presence. Because when Jesus did the deal on the cross, he walked into our houses and said, dining room here, living room there, that wall must go. He broke it down and said, come on in. And little by little, in a trembling kind of way, we just moved towards him and said, it's okay. You're not going to die. I took care of all the stuff. But let me show you how to live. Let me tell you how to live, and I want to live through you. He said, but my pain and my past and my regrets and all my secrets and I got those. I paid for those already. Those are gone. Let's not do that anymore, and let's move on. I want to close with Isaiah's own words. In the very next chapter, Isaiah 54, verse 7, God is speaking through Isaiah and says, for a brief moment I abandoned you, but with deep compassion I will bring you back. In a surge of anger, I hid my face from you for a moment. But with everlasting kindness, I will have compassion on you, says the Lord, your Redeemer. That's the good stuff.